Greetings, I am Enraged Eggplant and welcome to Dungeons and GURPS. In this video I would like to talk about D&D and GURPS damage types, elemental resistances and differences between damage types and damage sources. Damage types in D&D are much less impactful than in GURPS. I think the only time damage type is important in D&D is when a character has damage reduction or energy resistance, and that's basically it outside of very few other cases. In GURPS, damage type is much more important and, I guess, interactive. Not everyone takes damage in the same way due to injury multipliers and different injury tolerance advantages. To be fair to D&D, it does try to represent that with certain damage reductions, but I like the approach of GURPS better. Different types of damage also interact differently with DR, blunt trauma, knockback, hit locations and various other traits. First, let's talk about physical damage types. In D&D they are piercing, slashing and bludgeoning. GURPS has impaling, cutting, crushing and 4 types of piercing damage. Crushing is obvious. It is dealt by blunt impacts, fists, maces, explosions. Crushing damage does not usually have an injury multiplier, but it deals blunt trauma better than other damage types when being absorbed by flexible armor. It can cause knockback. When targeting the neck, crushing attacks have a 1.5 wounding multiplier. When hitting a male human in the groin, crushing attacks deal double shock and impose a -5 penalty on knockdown rolls, which is significant. I have read an anonymous poster on TJ say that this is actually cinematic, because it should apply to females as well, but I have no experience to back that up. By default you cannot target the eyes, arteries and vitals, but GURPS martial arts allows crushing attacks to target vitals when attacking from behind, and also lets them target joints. Also, there is another special feature of the crushing damage type. If you roll a negative damage number or a 0, you deal no damage, while all other types deal the minimum of 1 point of damage. Depending on the degree of realism you are looking for, you can have crushing attacks cause no bleeding, or have them cause bleeding. Many GURPS players consider this to be one of the weakest damage types, but it still has its uses. Cutting damage is inflicted by claws, sharp teeth, axes, swung swords, knives and similar attacks. Like crushing attacks, cutting attacks inflict knockback and blunt trauma, but they cannot be used to target eyes and vitals. Unlike crushing attacks, cutting attacks have a 1.5 wounding multiplier, meaning that their penetrating damage is multiplied by 1.5 when determining injury. This multiplier is increased to 2 when targeting the neck. And all this is applied regardless of any injury tolerance. Typically, this is considered to be a very good damage type, good enough to warrant a nerf in GURPS low-tech in the form of the edge protection rules. If a cutting attack deals less damage and targets double DR from armor, then it is treated as a crushing attack. I like this rule a lot. D&D piercing attacks are impaling attacks in GURPS, not piercing. These represent stab wounds, such as from swords, spears, daggers, arrows. Impaling attacks can target the eyes, vital organs, chinks in armor and can inflict blunt trauma. They do not deal knockback. Impaling damage has an injury multiplier of 2 when hitting flesh, which is enormous. This is reduced to 1 when targeting limbs and extremities. However, unlike cutting and crushing attacks, impaling attacks are worse against unliving targets, even worse against homogeneous targets, and also worse against diffuse targets. Actually, I didn't even know that the damage cap for diffuse targets is 1 HP for impaling and piercing attacks before recording this video. I always thought that this is 2 HP for all damage types. Swung impaling weapons also tend to get stuck, which can be either a boon or a bane depending on the situation. Generally speaking, this is a very strong damage type, but in some situations it is subpar, and such situations can be not that rare in fantasy games, as skeletons and golems are favorites of some GMs. Now there's piercing damage that is dealt by fast-moving blunt projectiles or small, sharp objects. This should not be confused with D&D piercing, as it is closer to the ballistic damage type from D20 Modern. I should also mention that this is not only reserved for firearms, but also for slings, blowgun darts, stingers, and similar weapons. The difference between impaling and piercing is a contentious topic among GURPS players, but I am more or less okay with the default presentation. There are 4 categories that depend on the projectile size: small piercing, piercing, large piercing, and huge piercing. All of them may inflict blunt trauma and can target the eyes, vitals, and chinks in armor. Huge piercing is literally the same as impaling, aside from some armor types being weak to impaling attacks, such as many modern bulletproof vests. I might be missing something else, please tell me in the comments if there are any other differences. Large piercing has a 1.5 wounding multiplier, piercing has no wounding multiplier, and small piercing has a 0.5 wounding multiplier. All piercing attacks are worse against unliving targets, homogeneous targets, and limbs. You might remember that D&D also has subdual damage, which sort of qualifies as another physical damage type. There is no such thing in GURPS, as it is much more granular and you can subdue your enemy in various other ways. I think there is even a box dedicated to this in the basic set. Now let's check the rest of the damage types in GURPS. Burning attacks are actually much more complex than they seem at first. There are 2 types of burning attacks: normal burning attacks and tight beam burning attacks. The latter is used by lasers and similar attacks, and they work differently. Burning attacks deal no blunt trauma or knockback and have no wounding multipliers. Tight beam burning attacks can target vitals, eyes, and chinks in armor, but normal burning attacks cannot. Here's another new thing that I have learned while preparing for this video. Tight beam burning attacks that target vitals have an injury multiplier of 2, not 3 like all other attacks. Any burning attacks can ignite fires, but tight beam burning attacks are much worse at doing that. This is especially effective when targeting clothes. Corrosion attacks are very strong. While they normally have no injury multiplier, they corrode armor, even if blocked by DR. For every 5 points of basic damage you inflict, reduce the target's DR by 1, in addition to regular damage. Corrosion attacks have a 1.5 injury multiplier when targeting face or neck, and if they deal a major wound to the face, they may also blind the target. Toxic attack cause cellular damage like disease, poison, and withering. Toxic attacks cannot affect machines and other targets with immunity to metabolic hazards. While there are no other rules concerning this damage type, there might be additional rules concerning specific toxic attacks, as this damage can represent a whole plethora of different abilities. Finally, there are fatigue attacks that do not cause HP damage but deplete FP. Just like toxic attacks, they often have modifiers that make the attack more specific, and they do not do anything to targets that do not have FP, like undead or machines. You can also make a fatigue attack that drains energy reserve instead of fatigue points. You should keep in mind that fatigue attacks are very strong, as even large monsters usually do not have that many more FP than humans. And that's it for damage types, but that's only the beginning. Do you remember D&D energy types? Fire, cold, electricity, acid, sonic, force, etc. How do you make a fire attack? You obviously make it a burning attack. How do you make an acid attack? You obviously make it a corrosion attack. How do you make a cold attack? Or a sonic attack? Things are not as obvious as they were for the previous energy types, but if you look closely, they actually aren't that obvious or set in stone for flaws either. Have you ever thought about why the limited defense box for damage resistance in GURPS basic set lists burning damage and heat/fire as separate categories of equivalent limitation value? Aren't they the same? I've seen many people use them interchangeably, but I'm a firm believer that that's wrong. This applies not only to damage resistance but also to vulnerability. As I said, some of the energy sources have obvious damage types in GURPS, at least at the first glance. Fire is burning, acid is corrosion, electricity is burning surge, cold is non-incendiary burning, sonic is also non-incendiary burning. Isn't that a lot of burning? Wouldn't getting damage resistance against burning damage cover all those damage sources? Yes, it would, if the justification makes sense, but let's inspect the damage sources and types in more detail. Let's start with heat and fire. Obviously, fire and heat usually deal burning damage, but there are other options as well. Intense heat might deal fatigue damage with the heat modifier. Fatigue damage with a dehydration modifier may make sense as well. I've also seen the fireball spell started up as a crushing attack with the incendiary modifier, and it would make sense to consider it a fire attack as well. Damage resistance against burning would only protect against one of these attacks, but will let everything else through. If your character is supposed to be resistant to heat and fire, you might want to take damage resistance against heat and fire, not burning. Acid does corrosion damage, but are there any other options? At a first glance, no, but let's consider the following attacks. A forcefully launched ball of acid or a powerful acid jet. You might say that it deals corrosion damage and call it a day, but what if you want this attack to also knock enemies back, because the stream physically pushes them away? To accomplish that, you will have to make linked crushing and corrosion attacks. So damage resistance against corrosion would only prevent the corrosion damage from this, but damage resistance against acid would prevent both parts of the attack. There is another way, adding the double blunt trauma enhancement. This way your acid attack will actually deal blunt trauma. I like it better than the linked attack approach. I should note that any such damage resistance will erode away due to corrosion damage. To avoid this effect, take sealed acid resistant only, minus 60%, that can be found in GURPS sorcery, protection and warning spells. An acid-based industrial water knife from GURPS Ultratech probably will still deal cutting damage, but that's something super exotic. Electricity or lightning usually deal burning damage with a surge modifier. Sometimes it has the arcing surge modifier and/or a stunning side effect. What if I want my lightning to throw people around like in Star Wars? Then maybe it should be a crushing attack with a surge modifier, or linked crushing and burning surge attacks, or a burning surge attack with a double blunt trauma enhancement. There is also a phenomenon called electric discharge machining or spark erosion. Attacks based on this principle probably should deal corrosion surge damage. So damage resistance against burning is not enough to cover all electrical attacks, and damage resistance against electricity covers more than just burning surge attacks. Also, do not forget that some electrical shocks actually are afflictions. Those will simply ignore DR against burning, but DR against electricity will provide a resistance bonus. Note that lightning attacks might also have limitations that represent them working unpredictably around conductors, like the lightning spell from GURPS Magic. Cold attacks can be very varied. Cold can deal non-incendiary burning damage or fatigue damage with a freezing modifier. Quite often, there are some additional side effects such as numbness, dexterity penalties, or paralysis. A cold attack that freezes cellular liquids might even justify toxic damage, if other options do not satisfy you. Some cinematic cold attacks are actually afflictions that make you go numb, paralyze, or impede you in other ways. Thus, damage resistance against burning or fatigue only covers one aspect of cold, while damage resistance against cold covers them all. Sometimes ice attacks are lumped together with cold, so damage resistance against cold and ice may protect you against impaling or piercing icicles, crushing cold winds, or sharp cutting ice shards. Consult with your GM about the differences between cold and ice attacks, what kind of DR is required against them, and if you are the GM, then think about that too. Sonic attacks can be very varied as well. GURPS suggests using non-incendiary burning damage to represent sonic attacks that cook flesh, and corrosion damage to represent vibrations that disrupt molecular bonds. I can see crushing, cutting, and even piercing sonic attacks being valid as well. If you remember the Withering Whale spell, then you can also have sonic toxic attacks. Some sonic attacks may be afflictions that stun, nauseate, knock out, or deafen the target, or have similar side effects or symptoms. Thus, damage resistance against sound covers a wide range of damage types. Sonic attacks should also have limitations that limit them to sound-transmitting mediums, or make them hearing-based, or have enhancements that allow them to work well underwater. There are some other things you might want to consider when making energy or elemental resistances. Large area injury, such as from area attacks, takes into account the average of your torso DR and the DR of your least protected hit location. If you take normal damage resistance, it does not affect your eyes, so if you do not want your fire-resistant character to be more vulnerable to big explosions, you should protect your eyes as well. There's two rules as written methods for that, taking nictitating membrane with the same limitation, or giving your damage resistance the force field enhancement. However, in the latter case, your damage resistance will also protect your worn gear, which might not be what you were looking for, and nictitating membrane might be cost inefficient. Since force field is a plus 20% enhancement, I think it would be fair to make a new enhancement for damage resistance. Includes eyes, plus 10%. An internal defense protects against attacks that bypass armor via cosmic or malediction to damage a victim from within. It has no effect on attacks with blood agent, contact agent, or respiratory attacks, all of which target a victim from the outside and rely on holes in his external defenses. An internal defense costs 1/5 of the external version's price. Thus, if you want your acid-resistant character to be able to drink acid, you should also buy internal damage resistance and possibly internal shield with acid resistant only as well. Sometimes this may be cost inefficient, but this is rules as written. Personally, I allow includes internal plus 20% enhancement for damage resistance. Some elemental attacks are afflictions with malediction or other modifiers that bypass DR, but cause no damage. Resistance or immunity to such noxious effects require you to take resistant or immunity respectively. GURPS sorcery protection and warning spells prices an immunity to a single element noxious effects as 10 points. Now that I have divulged my thoughts on the more common damage sources, let's talk about some more exotic stuff. Force damage, such as from a magic missile spell, can be represented differently depending on the attack's nature. One common feature is that it must have the effects in substantial plus 20% enhancement to be able to affect incorporeal beings, just like in D&D. If this is a blunt force attack, such as from the aforementioned magic missile, then this is a crushing attack. You can also add a double knockback. Certain force attacks can take form of bullets, spears or blades, and those could deal cutting, impaling or piercing damage, possibly with double knockback and or double blunt trauma enhancements. Positive energy damage in D&D damages undead creatures and heals living and deathless. I won't blame you for not knowing about the deathless creature type. It is possible to do exactly that in GURPS, and I do have a write-up of that somewhere, but it is super clunky and I would not recommend using that. Damage and healing are not equivalent in GURPS, and instead I would just recommend focusing on the damaged aspect of this energy source. A good candidate is non-incendiary burning damage, limited with accessibility only on undead minus 50%. If you wanted to ignore armor, add Cosmic Irresistible Attack plus 300%. Negative energy damage in D&D works in reverse. It heals undead creatures and damages the living and deathless. This will not cost the same as positive energy damage in GURPS, because living creatures are much more common than the undead. Thus, I suggest using either non-incendiary burning or toxic damage, limited with accessibility only on living creatures minus 10%. If you wanted to ignore armor, add Cosmic Irresistible Attack plus 300%. Desiccation attacks are either fatigue attacks with a dehydration enhancement or toxic attacks that only affect beings with bodily fluids. or both linked. Steam and Scalding attacks deal non-incendiary burning damage. There was also the Frostburn damage type in D&D. It acted identically to cold damage, but could only be healed when a heat source was available. That's how cold damage works by default in GURPS, so we will have to either ignore this damage type or come up with something else. I'd rather do the former. There is also Rime fire damage that is half fire and half cold. In GURPS, you do it by linking a fire and a cold attack together. Vile damage is non-incendiary burning damage with Cosmic, can only be healed with divine abilities, plus 100%. This is not 100% similar to the D&D Vile damage, but I think that it's close enough. Pyramid 325 has an article called Essential Magic that introduces many new spells based on the essential elements found in GURPS magic. Most of them can be treated as new damage types. Phlogiston damage is burning damage with Surge Arcing, plus 100%, side effect Stunning, plus 50%, and secondary side effect Paralysis, plus 30%. Basically, it is very similar to normal lightning damage, but can also paralyze the victim on a bad HT roll. Adamant missiles deal physical damage with an armor divisor of 2. Hellfire damage is burning damage that treats any targets as if they were 2 steps more flammable. If the target catches fire, the Hellfire does an extra 1 damage. Hellfire can only be extinguished with magic or with essential water. This adds Incendiary 2 plus 20% and Cosmic Lingering side effect plus 100% for a total of plus 120%. Personally, I think that this is too strong, as in skin becomes easily flammable, turning Hellfire attacks into inevitable death. Instead of this write-up, I treat Hellfire as burning damage with armor divisor of 2 and affects insubstantial plus 20%. Alcahest inflicts corrosion damage that leaves a lingering effect that deals 1 point of corrosion damage per second, for a number of seconds equal to the number of dice. This effect can only be removed by rinsing the targeted zone with essential water. This is accomplished by applying Cosmic Lingering effect plus 100%. Finally, I want to mention a write-up of a new damage type that can be found on another blog. I use these aging attacks in my games, and I will link this post in the description. And that's it for this video, thank you for watching and I'll see you next time.